He went to bed the way he always did. No pain, no complaints, with that familiar quiet thought, "Everything is fine." And in the morning, he did not wake up. What makes this especially hard is not how rare it is, but how often it could have been prevented. I have seen this too many times to speak about it lightly, and if you are listening to me right now, it means you still have time. At your age, the body no longer forgives what it once ignored. What used to pass unnoticed now quietly accumulates, and the most dangerous thing is not sharp pain, not obvious symptoms, but this deceptive calm. People tell me, "Doctor, I felt normal. I went to sleep like always." And that is exactly what frightens me the most, because heart attacks and strokes often do not begin with drama. They begin with silence. Tell me honestly, have you ever gone to bed feeling slightly heavy, maybe a bit tired, perhaps with a subtle pressure in your chest or neck, but decided not to pay attention? Have you ever thought, "It will pass by morning"? This is where the mistake begins. Not in fear, not in illness, but in underestimating the signals your body gives you. Tonight is not just another night. It is a period when your body switches modes. Your heart slows down, your blood pressure changes, your vessels react differently. And if something is already unstable inside, a plaque in a vessel, thickened blood, an overworked heart, night becomes the most vulnerable time. Not because sleep is dangerous, but because the body is unguarded. There is one very common habit, something people do almost every evening without even thinking, that sharply increases the risk of heart attack and stroke during sleep. I will tell you about it, but not yet, because if I simply name it now, many of you will not understand why it is so dangerous, and without understanding, there is no real change. What matters is not just what you do, but how it affects your body step by step. And I want you to see this clearly, to feel it, so that tonight, not someday, but tonight, you act differently. Over the years, I have learned that the people who stay healthy are not the ones who know more, but the ones who pay attention to small things, quiet things, the things others ignore. Stay with me until the end, because the most important point, the one that many people do not know, will be revealed there. It can quite literally save your life. And if you feel that this conversation is important, support it. Subscribe and like this video. Not for me, but so that more people your age can hear what they truly need to hear, because what seems harmless in the evening can become decisive by morning. And this is exactly where we need to look closer, where the real risk quietly begins to form. And this quiet beginning, it almost always hides in something that feels completely ordinary, something people even consider comforting. I'm talking about what happens in the last 1 or 2 hours before sleep, that period when the body should be slowing down, preparing for recovery, but instead is often pushed in the opposite direction. I have had patients who followed all the big rules. They took their medications, they checked their pressure, they even walked regularly, and yet, when we looked closer, we found a small evening habit that undid everything else. It was not dramatic, it did not feel dangerous, but physiologically it created the perfect conditions for a nighttime crisis. Late, heavy eating. It may sound too simple, almost disappointing. But let me explain to you what really happens inside your body when you eat late, especially after 7 or 8 in the evening. When you consume a dense meal, fatty, salty, or rich in carbohydrates, your digestive system becomes highly active. Blood is redirected toward the stomach and intestines. The heart is forced to work harder to support this process. At the same time, insulin levels rise, and with certain foods, blood becomes temporarily more viscous. This alone already increases the load on your cardiovascular system. Now imagine what happens next. You lie down. In a horizontal position, the work of the heart changes. Venous return increases, the distribution of blood shifts. If the vessels are already narrowed by plaques, if the heart muscle is tired, if the blood is thicker than it should be, this combination becomes unstable. Not immediately painful, but unstable. I remember a man, 62 years old, strong, disciplined, never missed his checkups. He loved one thing, a late, generous dinner. "It helps me relax," he would say. One evening it was especially heavy. Meat, bread, something salty, a bit of alcohol. He went to bed feeling full, almost pleasantly tired. Around 3 in the morning, his heart went into a dangerous rhythm. By the time help arrived, it was too late. And when we looked at his condition, there was no single catastrophic cause. It was the accumulation, the timing, the load placed on the body at the wrong moment. At night, your body is supposed to repair vessels, regulate pressure, stabilize heart rhythm. But if digestion is still actively ongoing, if the body is processing a large amount of food, this repair process is disrupted. Instead of recovery, the system remains under strain. There is also another subtle mechanism. After a heavy meal, especially with salt, blood pressure can rise slightly. Not enough to alarm you, but enough to increase stress on vulnerable vessels. And during sleep, when control is reduced, this can lead to rupture or blockage. What can you do starting tomorrow? Not something complicated. Just shift your main meal earlier. Allow your body at least 3 hours before sleep without heavy food. If you feel hunger later, keep it light, something that does not burden digestion. A small portion, not a full meal. Try this for just 7 days. Pay attention to how you sleep, how you wake up, how your heart feels in the morning. Many of my patients notice the difference almost immediately. Lighter sleep, steadier pulse, less pressure fluctuations. But here is what is important. Even those who correct their evening meals sometimes continue another habit. Quieter, less obvious, but just as dangerous. It does not sit on your plate. It does not feel heavy. And yet it affects your vessels even more directly. And this is exactly where we need to go deeper, because this next element works in a way most people never even consider. And when this second habit appears alongside a late meal, the risk does not simply add up, it multiplies. Because now we are not only talking about load on the heart, but about direct impact on the vessels themselves. I am referring to something many people consider harmless, even beneficial in small amounts. An evening drink. You may have heard it before. A little alcohol relaxes the vessels. It helps to fall asleep. It calms the nerves. And in isolation, in very small amounts, this may sound reasonable. But in real life, especially after the age of 50, the body reacts differently. What once felt light now becomes unpredictable. Let me explain what actually happens. Alcohol first causes a short-term dilation of blood vessels. This gives a false sense of warmth, relaxation, even a slight drop in pressure. But this phase is brief. Soon after, the body responds with a compensatory spasm. The vessels narrow again, sometimes more than before, and this change often happens during the night when you are already asleep and unaware. At the same time, alcohol affects heart rhythm. It increases the likelihood of irregular beats, especially in those who already have subtle electrical instability in the heart. Many people do not feel this during the day. But at night, when the nervous system shifts and control weakens, these rhythm disturbances can become dangerous. There is also the effect on blood itself. Alcohol contributes to dehydration. Even a small amount can reduce plasma volume, making the blood relatively thicker. And thickened blood moves more slowly, increasing the chance of clot formation. This is one of the key mechanisms behind nighttime strokes. I recall a woman, 58 years old, calm, careful, attentive to her health. Every evening she allowed herself a glass of wine. Just to unwind, she would say. No excess, no obvious harm. But one night she woke up unable to move her arm. A stroke. When we analyzed her routine, everything seemed correct, except this one detail. Combined with mild hypertension and age-related vascular changes, that harmless glass became a trigger. And this is where the illusion lies. People do not associate cause and effect because the result does not come immediately. It comes hours later in the quiet of the night. If you truly want to reduce your risk, the simplest and most effective step is this: avoid alcohol in the evening entirely. Not reduce, not just a little. Remove it from the hours before sleep. Give your body a clear, stable environment at night. Let the vessels remain calm. Let the heart keep a steady rhythm. Let the blood maintain its natural balance. Try this for at least 7 days. Observe not only your sleep, but your morning clarity, your energy, your sense of internal stability. Many people are surprised how much more restful their nights become when this one factor is removed. And if what you are hearing resonates with you, if you understand how these small habits shape something much larger, then support this message. Subscribe and like this video so that more people can avoid mistakes that cost too much. Because even without food and alcohol, there is still another factor. One that does not enter the body, but changes everything inside it. It is silent. It leaves no trace on a plate or in a glass. But it tightens vessels, disrupts rhythm, and prepares the ground for exactly the kind of events we are trying to prevent. And once you recognize it, you will start noticing it every single evening. And when both the body and the vessels are already under strain, this third factor quietly finishes what the others have started. It does not come from food or drink. It comes from within. And that is precisely why, at this moment, a very specific process begins. Stress hormones, especially cortisol and adrenaline, increase. The heart rate may not feel dramatically faster, but it becomes less stable. Blood pressure can rise slightly, sometimes only by a few points, not enough to cause alarm, but enough to matter over time. And most importantly, the vessels react. They narrow. Not fully, not sharply, but just enough to reduce the margin of safety. Now remember everything we have already discussed. If there was a late meal, if there was alcohol, if there are already age-related changes in the Sosudi, this additional narrowing becomes the missing piece. I once observed a patient, a former engineer, very disciplined, very precise. He did everything correctly. Ate on time, did not drink, took his medication. But every evening he had a ritual. He would sit in silence and go over all the problems of the day. "I need to think," he would say. It gave him a sense of control. One night, this thinking turned into a long internal dialogue. He went to bed with tension, though he did not call it that. Around 4 in the morning, a sudden spike in pressure led to a hemorrhagic stroke, not because of one strong emotion, but because of accumulated, unprocessed strain. The body at your age requires a different kind of evening, not analysis, not stimulation, but transition. You need to understand this clearly. Sleep does not begin when you close your eyes. It begins an hour before that, with the signals you send to your nervous system. If those signals say alert, your body will not fully switch into recovery mode. What can you do starting tomorrow? Create a boundary. 1 hour before sleep, no heavy discussions, no disturbing information, no returning mentally to unresolved problems. If a thought comes, do not follow it. Let it pass. This is a skill, not a talent. Even a simple action helps. Sit quietly for a few minutes, breathe slowly, focus on something neutral. Not exciting, not worrying. You are not trying to relax in a forced way. You are simply allowing the system to slow down. Try this for 7 days. Observe how your sleep changes. Many people notice that they fall asleep faster, wake up less during the night, and feel more stable in the morning. And what is important? This is not just about comfort. This is about reducing real physical risk. But even when the mind becomes calmer, there is still something else, something mechanical, almost invisible, that continues to influence the heart and vessels throughout the night. It does not depend on what you think. It does not depend on what you eat. It depends on how you breathe. And this is where the next layer begins, one that many people live with for years without ever realizing its danger. And when breathing begins to change at night, everything we have already discussed starts to work under completely different conditions. Because the heart, the vessels, even the brain, all of them depend on one simple thing that many people stop noticing: stable oxygen supply. I am speaking about a condition that is extremely common after the age of 50, but often ignored for years. Nighttime breathing interruptions. You may have heard this described as snoring, or pauses in breathing, or simply restless sleep. But behind these ordinary words, there is a mechanism that directly leads to heart attacks and strokes. Let me explain it in a way you can feel. When a person falls asleep, the muscles relax. This is normal, but in some people, the muscles of the throat relax too much. The airway narrows or even briefly closes. Breathing stops for a few seconds, sometimes longer. The brain senses a drop in oxygen and sends an emergency signal. The body reacts with a micro-awakening, often so brief that the person does not remember it. But inside, a storm has already occurred. Oxygen drops. Carbon dioxide rises. The heart suddenly speeds up. Blood pressure jumps. The vessels constrict sharply. Then breathing resumes, and the cycle repeats again and again throughout the night. Some people experience this dozens, even hundreds of times per night. Now connect this with everything we have already discussed. If the vessels are already under stress, if the blood is thicker, if the nervous system is tense, these repeated surges become extremely dangerous. Each episode is like a small UDAR on the cardiovascular system, and one of them can become the last. I remember a patient, 64 years old. He told me, "Doctor, I sleep deeply, I don't wake up at night." But his wife said something different. Loud snoring, periods of silence, then a sudden gasp. This repeated all night. He did not feel it, but his body did. One morning, he woke up with severe weakness on one side of his body. A stroke. When we investigated further, it became clear that he had long-standing sleep apnea, years of nightly oxygen deprivation, pressure spikes, and vascular stress. This is the danger, not what you feel, but what happens without your awareness. And here is what I want you to do. Tonight, or tomorrow, ask someone close to you, how do you breathe during sleep? Do you snore loudly? Are there pauses? Do you sometimes wake up with a feeling of choking or a dry mouth? Even morning headaches can be a sign. If you sleep alone, pay attention to indirect signals. Do you wake up unrefreshed? Do you feel tired despite enough sleep? Does your pressure behave unpredictably in the morning? This is not something to ignore. There are ways to correct this, from simple positional changes to medical devices that keep the airway open. But the first step is awareness. And even before any equipment, you can try something very simple. Sleep on your side, not on your back. Elevate your head slightly. Avoid heavy food and alcohol as we discussed. They worsen this condition significantly. Try this for 7 days. Observe your mornings, your clarity, your breathing, your sense of rest. Because when breathing becomes stable, the heart finally receives what it has been missing all night: calm, oxygen, and rhythm. But even with proper breathing, even with calm evenings and light meals, there is still one more layer. One that people often consider just a number, something they check occasionally and then forget. And yet, this number silently determines how your night will unfold. And this is where we need to look very carefully. Because here, mistakes are made not out of neglect, but out of false confidence. And this quiet confidence, it is often built on a number that seems acceptable. Not perfect, perhaps slightly elevated, but familiar. Something people get used to seeing and begin to consider normal for their age. I am speaking about blood pressure, not the number you measure in the morning at the clinic, not the one you occasionally check during the day when you feel unwell, but the pressure that lives with you in the evening and goes with you into the night. This is where one of the most dangerous misunderstandings occurs. Many people believe that if they feel relatively well, if the pressure is not extremely high, then there is no immediate risk. They tell me, "Doctor, it's usually around 140, sometimes 150 in the evening, but I don't feel it." And this is exactly the problem. They do not feel it, but the vessels feel it. With age, the walls of the arteries become less elastic. They no longer absorb pressure the way they once did. Even a moderate increase becomes a constant mechanical stress. And when this stress continues into the night, when the body is supposed to be resting, the risk increases sharply. At night, blood pressure should naturally decrease. This is a protective mechanism. The heart rests, the vessels recover. But in many people after 50, this night drop does not happen. Or worse, pressure rises even higher during sleep. And this is particularly dangerous because you are not aware of it. I have seen patients whose daytime readings seemed acceptable, but nighttime monitoring revealed something completely different. Spikes, fluctuations, periods of sustained high pressure, and then, without warning, a stroke or heart attack during sleep. I remember a man, 59 years old, calm, confident, always said, "I know my body." He checked his pressure from time to time. It was slightly elevated, but stable. He did not consider it a priority. One night there was a sudden increase in pressure. No symptoms, no warning. A vessel in the brain could not withstand the load. What is important to understand is this. Blood pressure is not just a number. It is force. Continuous force acting on your vessels. And at night, when combined with everything we have already discussed, digestion, alcohol, tension, breathing disturbances, this force becomes unpredictable. So what can you do? First, begin to observe your evening pressure, not just your morning readings. Measure it calmly, without hurry, in a seated position, at the same time each evening. Not once, but regularly. Second, if you already have prescribed medication, do not adjust it yourself. But do not ignore evening values either. This is something that must be discussed with a specialist, because timing of medication can be as important as the medication itself. And third, pay attention to how you feel in the morning. Not just good or bad, but specific signs. Heaviness in the head, slight dizziness, a feeling that the body has not fully rested. These can be indirect signals of nighttime pressure instability. Try this approach for 7 days, not to control everything, but to begin understanding your own patterns, because awareness changes behavior, and behavior changes outcomes. But even when pressure is monitored, even when all these elements are adjusted, there is still one final point, the one I told you about at the very beginning, the one that many people do not know. It does not seem like a cause, it does not look dangerous, and yet it often becomes the last link in the chain. And when you understand it, you will look at your evenings, and your sleep, in a completely different way. And now we come to what, in my experience, most often remains unnoticed. People adjust their food, refuse alcohol, try to calm their thoughts, even begin to monitor their pressure, and yet this one detail continues to quietly undermine everything. It is not what you add to your evening, it is what you forget to give your body. Water, not tea, not coffee, not soup, but simple, clean water. And more importantly, the absence of it in the evening hours. With age, the sense of thirst becomes weaker. You may not feel that you need to drink, even when your body already does. And this is where a slow, almost invisible dehydration begins. Now imagine the internal environment we have been building throughout this conversation. Blood that has already become slightly thicker after food or alcohol, vessels that may be narrowed or less elastic, pressure that may fluctuate, breathing that may not always be stable. And into this system, we add one more factor: reduced fluid. What happens then? The blood becomes more viscous, it flows more slowly. The risk of clot formation increases. Circulation in the smallest vessels becomes less efficient. The heart must work harder to push this thicker blood through the system. And at night, when movement is minimal, when the body is in a horizontal position, the slowdown becomes even more pronounced. I have seen this pattern repeatedly. A person drinks very little in the evening to avoid waking up at night. It seems logical, convenient. But by doing this, they create conditions where the blood becomes concentrated exactly at the time when stability is most needed. Oh,